We should have done Candlebox instead.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Listography. Jason, Joe, and Crams are here. This week we are covering the Cranberries, Ireland's own. Not sure exactly why we're doing the Cranberries, aside from the fact that two of our commenters just constantly talking about the Cranberries and saying they're like one of the greatest bands of the 90s, maybe even of all time. They're really, really hyping up the Cranberries. And so I guess we just decided we had to see for ourselves. I think we all know the hits at least. Personally, I didn't know much more than that. How about you guys?
Knew everything in the first run because I used to like them quite a lot. I mean, in my freshman year at Columbia, I was known as the 90s kid on my dorm. So I was obligated to listen to every Cranberries album just to keep up the reputation. So
I don't think I'd ever listened. I listened to the first one, and that's it. Never listened to another full Cranberries album. That's it. That's all I got to say about the Cranberries.
So yeah, I only really know the hits. My cousin way back in the day had probably like the first three albums, and I know I listened to them, but I have no recollection of them or what they were like. So going in brand new, basically still.
I was surprised to learn that they sold like 50 million albums around the world. So they were really popular. Even in the US, they sold millions and millions of their first couple albums.
All right, so 8 to rank. I don't think there's any real like questionable releases or anything. We're just doing the 8 that there are. And who wants to start it off?
I will start it off with some not so good material. I'm going with at 2 stars. This is a bad album in my opinion. I've got Wake Up and Smell the Coffee. Nothing remarkable at all on this. Pretty boring. It's void of anything, like any parts that are interesting. One note that is probably better on this album that is not very noticeable on any other album is the drumming is a little bit better, but pretty much throughout their catalog, I don't find their rhythm section to be anything to write home about. This one kind of sounds like the debut, or I'm sorry, it doesn't sound like the debut. It sounds like it should be their debut just because of how like lackluster it is. Being what, their 5th or 6th album, it sounds like they're kind of finding themselves and finding their sound, but they shouldn't be by this point. And the album before this, I thought had some pretty cool ideas and concepts, but it didn't really get a lot of sales and it didn't get a lot of good critical praise. So instead of just kind of building off that, I think they just were, they seem really discouraged on this album. Like they're really defeated, even though I like some of the stuff on the album previous. They were just like, well, that didn't work. We're not trying that again. So I just think this is a very lousy listen. I don't even in my paragraph of notes have like one song written down, good or bad, because it's just very, like, I think Pretty Eyes was one of the better songs that I liked. But yeah, this is just a one ear, exit the other ear. And that's what I got. 2 stars, Wake Up and Smell the Coffee.
I'll go next, I guess, if that's all right. The bottom for me is 1999's Bury the Hatchet. It's got album art designed by Storm Thurgerson. Is that how you say his name? He's a famous album cover designer. He did some Pink Floyd covers. That is the coolest thing about this record. Unfortunately, I will talk a lot about how bad some of their guitar tones are throughout some of their albums, and they're pretty bad here too, especially on the 3rd track, Promises. There are a few decent songs. I like Animal Instinct. I think that one's pretty good. You and Me is all right. But there's some really awful songs on this one too. I think some of the worst in their discography appear on this record, like Copycat and Fee Fi Fo. Obviously, I agree with the sentiment of Fee Fi Fo. I think, molesting children is bad, but the lyrics are so clunky and like on the nose. And there's nothing really like, she's not saying anything artful or insightful. It's just, she's just saying don't abuse children. Doesn't seem to be bringing much to the subject, and there's no melody to make it catchy or interesting, and the band's just very plain. There are very few instances on this record and throughout a lot of their records that make me think like, wow, that was a cool part, or that was a cool thing that person did. It's all just very kind of wallpaper, and nowhere more so than on Bury the Hatchet. So I actually got it at 2.5 stars. So that's as low as I'll go, but yeah, not great.
Well, we are wildly apart right off the bat with the Cranberries. This is going to be some contentious viewing. My bottom is Roses. This one's incredibly boring. Some of their worst lyrics, Losing My Mind, terrible. Raining in My Heart, just pure, like 3 minutes of cliche after cliche after cliche. Conduct, Tomorrow, Fire and Soul, boring, boring, boring. The only song I think on this whole album that's better than like average at best would be Schizophrenic Playboy. It's the only thing with like any interest. Everything else, yeah, not good. This was their comeback after 11 years or so, and it was produced by Stephen Street, so you'd feel, you'd think it would have something going for it, but yeah, there's just no good songs here, and the band sounds like they're falling asleep. So I give it 2.5 stars, and definitely easily the worst for me.
Yeah, I also have it at 2, and it's my next one. It's my number 7. It's Roses. Boring, boring, boring is a very eloquent way to put it. Nothing is updated here after the big, break after the first era. It's not very exciting. They're just so nonchalant sometimes. Like there's one thing for like just the moodiness and the vibe, but sometimes it's just like, can you just try a little bit more here? I feel like with some of their songs, another problem with this album is some of the songs are just longer than, they used to wrap up their songs in 3 to 4 minutes. Now they're kind of expanding it out a little bit, and they just kind of keep drag. And for God's sakes, Dolores, write a different melody once in a while. You can just copy and paste. Like, I don't think she's a bad singer. I don't think she's nearly as good as a lot of the praise she gets. And obviously she's got a few techniques that set her apart from everyone else. But a lot of the stuff she writes is just like in one register, one little window. Everything's got kind of the same inflection, the same bounce, the same rhythm, and it just gets a little tiring. I agree with Joe. Schizophrenic Playboy is a good song. It doesn't sound like the rest of the album, which is why it's noteworthy. So there's some good things I like about it. I like some of the string arrangements, but I just don't really think they write too many good songs. When they write good songs, they're great, but a lot of times they just miss the mark. And Jason was right what he said when we were talking about Fee Fi Fo or Fi Fo Fum or whatever it was. I usually like what all of their songs are about. Like, I like the themes, I like the sentiments, I like their approach, but sometimes the lyrics just don't do it for me at all. And that kind of happens a lot on this album. So Roses, 2 stars, number 7.
My number 7, I've got Roses. I don't have a whole lot to add to what you guys said. You pretty much covered it. Pretty plain in the songwriting department, pretty plain in the performances. I do think, though, that the first 2 songs are pretty decent. Conduct and Tomorrow. I think those are solid little tunes. Those 2 tracks had my hopes a little high for this record, and then just nothing after that for me. So 2.5 stars, unfortunately, staying there for a little while still.
I'm going to leave the 2.5 stars behind, but not by much. I'm going up to 3 stars for Something Else. It is every band's a prerequisite for these bands that sort of have broken up and like they kind of want to put something out to fulfill a contractual obligation or just to make some money. Something Else is a bunch of acoustic covers. Maybe there's 2 original songs on here. I really didn't put in enough research, so I just don't care. The acoustic versions are nice. Like, they're totally fine. Those are some of their best songs for sure. But I would rather listen to them full band than an acoustic setting, as I would for almost every single artist that puts out an album like this. So it's 3 stars. It's pleasant, but I will never, ever think of it again.
Yeah, buddy, I am the cocktail to your cranberry right now. I've got that album next, number 6. I'm going up to 2.5 stars, which means I think it's okay. To quote my friend Joe, did they need to make this? I don't know. I actually do like the original tracks on here. Glory, or The Glory, and Rupture, not bad. The only song, well, I don't think it's better than the original version, but the only song, like the only reimagining with the acoustic version that piques my interest is Zombie. I think the acoustic sounds really cool with that. I don't like it more than the original version, but pretty much everything else is just basic and forgettable, and doesn't have a lot of spice to it. But I do like the way the band sounds with the acoustic setting and the strings. And because I like the original tracks, it really just makes me wish they just did a more low-key, acoustic kind of coffee shop album with original material. I think that's would have sounded really good. Oh, and by the way, I really can't stand the acoustic version of Dreams. Everything else is average. I think the Zombie is cool, and I think this version of Dreams is just not good. So yeah, 2.5. Something else.
All right, still a 2.5 for me. Number 6, I'm going with In the End, which is the final album, posthumous release after Dolores's death. And it was pieced together from demos that she had recorded. So I think given those circumstances, they did a pretty decent job. The vocals don't sound like they were taken from a demo. They don't sound like scratch vocal tracks. They sound like complete, full, like intended to be on a studio LP vocals, which I think is a testament probably to Dolores's voice, just solid, all the time. Unfortunately, I don't think the songs are very interesting at all. I think it's nice they did it. It kind of puts a nice little bow on the career and puts things to rest kind of nicely. It's a nice little punctuation mark at the end of the career, but not that interesting of a record at all. 2.5 stars.
Number 6, I've got Wake Up and Smell the Coffee. I agree with what you guys have been saying. Like, they just start to recycle these melodies way too much right off the bat with Analyze. It sounds exactly like Dreams. The melody is Dreams. It's just a rewritten Dreams. It has the same like beats and builds as Dreams. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, this is a pretty good song. I like this one. And then I like listened to it again. I was like, it's Dreams. And there's a couple more on here. It sounds like stuff they've already done. At this point, this is whatever, 5 albums in, 6 albums in. Like they didn't find like that next sound to go to. So they just kind of went back to what they were good at. And there's some decent stuff on here, but a lot of, the lyrics are like bad high school poetry. A lot of times when she's trying to write about like a serious big subject like environmentalism, which creeps in a bunch here, it's just the lyrics kind of take me out of the music too much because they're just kind of awkward and forced. Some good bass lines on here, maybe a little less jangly guitar. Vocal work's about the same. There are a couple good tracks kind of shoved all the way at the bottom, which I don't even think I noticed the first time through because I was really disliking the whole thing. But Every Morning and Do You Know, which is like tracks 11 and 12, there's like 15, too long. Do You Know has a really strong melody, some nice vocals. Every Morning has some nice slidey guitars in it and like a little bit of a different sound to it. I don't know. I first I had this all the way at the bottom, but those last couple songs kind of save it a little bit. So I have it up to 3 stars. It's decent, but I don't know. It's like the first half of the whole album is pretty much a throwaway. So it's not going to be something I go back to.
All right, my number 5 is probably going to upset some Cranberry faithful, and it is To the Faithful Departed, but I am going up to 3 stars here, so I think it's a good album. Best thing about it is what the album is about. I think they do a good job really bringing to light, sort of going through the journey and all of the political movements that she kind of like, and she does it in a pretty good, like intimate way, a little bit of like first person kind of, not storytelling, but kind of sentiment. You really get a sense that she's a real good, like, spokeswoman for her causes and all of that. However, I don't think the music, the way the music is written and the playing match the content of this album at all. Like they're just so lifeless with their playing sometimes. And she just, they really weigh her down and weighs down the emotionality of this album, which should be there. Lyrics could be better, obviously. I think it misses a really good standout. Like if Zombie was on this album, I think it would just make the album that much more, have that core song in there. And oh man, I could not stand I Just Shot John Lennon. I thought that song was just atrocious. I get what they were going for. It just did not land for me at all. Hollywood, I feel like, was trying to recreate that Zombie sound, like that heavier kind of grunge, like let's go. The singing and the lyrics on Salvation, dreadful. So I'm not crazy about how this album starts, but once you kind of settle into it, it takes you on a good ride. I think War Child was very nice, like the strings and the horns. I like the Rebels a lot. It is probably too long. I understand why it's long. I mean, it's more of a statement to make this big hour-long kind of epic stance, but I just wish their musical compositions were more interesting, and I wish the playing had more passion, and that is almost the case with all but maybe 8 or 9 songs in their catalog. So it's unfortunate. I feel like this album has potential to be much better than it is, but just wasn't. So number 5, 3 stars to The Faithful Departed.
All right, my number 5 is going to be Something Else. This is kind of akin to when Joe and I covered Dwight Yoakam Acoustic.net. Does it need to exist? No, definitely not. But I think most of their songs actually do work better in this setting. I do not think the Cranberries are a very convincing rock band at all. When they get angry and the guitars get loud, that is when they are at their worst. Their distorted guitar tones are terrible, and I don't think she's really a strong singer when she's pushing that hard. So I think they're at their best when things are kind of lush and dreamy and kind of sparkly, maybe a little jangly. And this setting allows for that. You get the nice string arrangements coming in with the acoustic guitars, and just let the melodies do the work, because I don't think the band is really, going to do the heavy lifting for you. So that's where that's your strength. Might as well put it at the forefront. And that's what this record is. I mean, when you have 8 records, a record of remakes shouldn't be your 5th best one. So not great, not thrilled with the whole catalog overall. But I agree. I think the original tracks on this are good too. The Glory especially, I think, is pretty strong. Just My Imagination, I think, improves the most. Animal Instinct is a fair bit better on this as well. So yeah, it's definitely a worthwhile listen if you're a Cranberries fan.
Okay, I'm with Cramser. I got 2, The Faithful Departed is my number 5. Bringing Bruce Fairbairn to produce, go to Stephen Street, who was the Smiths producer, which is why all their songs sound like the Smiths. And he kind of tries to polish things up, take things to that like Zombie level. Hollywood sounds exactly like Zombie. It is, again, almost like a note for note recreation. And like, it's okay to like rehash some of that, but you got to like change it up a little bit. Like it is just note for note practically. I've always hated Salvation. I think it's Dolores's worst singing maybe in the whole catalog. Just the way she like emphasizes certain parts of words just annoys me, and the lyrics are bad. They're so literal, just like don't do drugs, kids with heroin eyes, and like it's just, come on, like make some like metaphors and similes and like disguise and just do something, because you are just so not bringing this conversation like beyond like what's directly in front of you, and it doesn't work. I think that's where she gets in trouble with her lyrics all the time, and especially on this album. Like War Child, pretty melody, the weepy strings I even like, but like the lyrics are just so just on the nose. Like there's just nothing else. It's exactly what you hear is what you get, and there's no deeper meaning or anything like that. You have like a U2 play with Forever Yellow Skies. And I just think her voice is not nearly as interesting on this one. It's like all shouting and yelping, and the dynamics and everything are kind of shelved for like this push for like big arena rock kind of things. And yeah, I just shot John Lennon is terrible. This one's 3 stars. There's really not much on here. Like it's not terrible for the most part, but it just kind of like exists. And you can kind of tell like they're just trying too hard with this one.
All right. My number 4, I've got it 3 stars. I think it's a good album. It's their last one. In the end, I like it seemingly more than Jason. It's got a beefier sound. There's some really good kind of like dream pop guitar sounds on here. Like at least it sounds different than the first 3 or 4, which all kind of sounded very similar. They weren't too curious about trying other styles, genres, even like little things. They weren't too into it at the beginning, but now they're going through some other things right now. I think Wake Me When It's Over is pretty bland, and A Place I Know also reminds me of kind of the first album with those kind of like lazy, kind of gothy, Sunday, rainy kind of vibes. But it's like, we've done that already. So a little hit or miss to start. And then Got It, I thought was really cool. I like the guitar sound a lot. Like that quick little chug. I like summer songs, but I thought the vocals were incredibly annoying. Overall, I think this one just has more life to the playing. I think it sounds better. Wholeheartedly agree with Jason that they're not a good grungy rock band. They are a pretty good, like lush, wafy, sad, mopey kind of band. That'll be reflected heavily in my tracks tomorrow for top 10. They're almost all just those slow little, sad little arpeggio songs. But yeah, this one I think probably has the heavier sound the best. I mean, they're not Megadeth by any means, but they do it best here. And overall, there's not as many clunkers and the songs are all pretty good. So 3 stars, my number 4 in the end.
All right, my number 4 still at 2.5 stars. I've got To the Faithful Departed. Pretty disappointed with this one after seeing that it was produced by Bruce Fairbairn. I had high hopes. He, of course, has produced a lot of things for a lot of different artists, but recently we talked about him on the channel. He produced The Ladder for Yes. I don't know. I think maybe the success of Zombie prior to this pushed them in a heavier direction. And I don't know, maybe that's why they switched producers, because they wanted to bring in a little more muscle and a little more oomph. But the guitar tones on this record are so bad. It sounds like they went to the local guitar shop and bought like that $100 starter kit where you get an amp and a guitar, and that's what they use to record the record. It sounds so awful. Really, really shocking from a producer like Fairbairn to have guitar tones like that on the record. It's mind-blowing to me. Salvation's a tricky one. I know what you guys are saying. I do think the lyrics are terrible. And like I said, the guitar tones are not great. And I don't think they're good at when they're trying to be like a loud rock band. But the flip side of that is that it's the only melody that sticks with me on the whole record. So by the time this thing's over, that's the only thing I can remember. So I actually think it's one of their better hooks. The bass at the beginning of the track Rebels is laughably terrible. It sounds like the guitarist is showing the bass player the song, and he's like, okay, that's the chord, and then that, and then that. And he's like, okay, I'm gonna write a part now. And they're like, no, we already recorded it. And that's what's on the record. He's like behind all of he's just playing root notes, and he's like a little bit behind every chord change. It's really, really bad.
Maybe they were trying a really cool polyrhythm or something and just didn't line it up right.
No. Like you said, I Just Shot John Lennon pretty bad. I like the idea of it, and I think it could have been cool. But again, she just doesn't do anything with the idea other than just state it in the most plain fashion possible. I don't know. I feel like a lot of this record feels really forced and like they're trying to recreate Zombie. I have it up a little higher because I don't know. I think it does have moments and little hooks here and there. I think it's a little more engaging. It reminds me kind of a record by a band that we've never talked about on the channel before, but it reminds me a lot of Lucy by Candlebox. Candlebox's second record, after they had those big hits. And then their second record has like, they just like plow through it. It's like they wrote the whole record in 10 minutes. That record has a lot of charm to it though. This one kind of does too. I just don't think it's as good. I don't know. They're all 2.5 stars. It's hard to rank them, but that's where it lands.
I like Lucy. We should have done Candlebox instead.
My number 4, however, I'll bring some positivity to this proceeding. I got In the End, which is surprisingly enjoyed by me. 3.5 stars. Not that that means really anything for me. Everything's 3.5 stars, but I did find myself liking this one a lot more, especially for a posthumous effort. They brought back Stephen Street. They took the demos that they had done with Dolores and like fleshed them out. They got like a backup singer to kind of fill in any gaps. And I think a lot of these songs are more interesting than anything they had written in, a decade or two. Catch Me If You Can. You still get that Cranberries feeling, but there's like a nice strong piano riff throughout. Some interesting drum work, like the synths in like the middle 8 part. Bridge. Got It is another good one. It's for them, like it's a pretty strong up-tempo rocker. Sounds modern, but it still has like some of that Smith's DNA, which pops up, I think, in their best stuff. And it's catchy and it's upbeat, which like I think I like them better when they're either upbeat or like sort of like wallowing in like lushness. Like when they try to rage and like get all political is usually where they stumble for me. Do You Remember has some cool vocal like layering. I don't know if it's because like they had to bring it back up to like fill in the gaps, but it's interesting the way it's like the lead vocals and the backups are kind of singing with and almost against each other. So it took me 1 or 2 tries for this one to really get it, but I think the difference in the sound really helps. Like it's just, by the time you get to this album, you're just sick of that same Cranberry sound. And this one, finally, I think they change it up and add some interesting, different sounds. Summer Song's good. And yeah, I think it's a good album, 3.5 stars. A nice way to end their career, their band.
Me and Joe really lining up on the Cranberries. We're going to have the same top 3. Someone is going to rag you for saying post-human again in the comments, but that's your Achilles heel, and mine is mixing up cream of the crop and cream rises to the top all the time. Cream rising out of the crops, whatever. I always mess up.
Did I really say post-human? Posthumous? I didn't say posthumous?
You said post. You always say posthumous, but it's posthumous.
Yeah, that's right. Posthumous. Posthumous. Why always do that?
It's all right. You always say that. I always say that. And Jason just has bad taste. So we all have our shit. My number 3, I've got Bury the Hatchet. I've got it at 3 stars still. I'm a little surprised Jason had this at the very bottom. I think it's pleasantly a cleaner, bigger sound and a little different sounding at times, even in little bits. Like I like the intro with the horns on Loud and Clear. At least that was something different. It's kind of got the less sad, mopey 90s, arpeggios with the jangliness, a little more forceful grunge at times, a little more guitar crunch, guitar crunch. And that the drums are a little bit more active, like on Promises. I think it's got good sequencing. It's kind of got that classic hit hard, slow it down, like you get into You and Me and Just My Imagination. They're nice and light. And then Shattered comes in. As I think the mix on the vocals on Shattered sound really cool. Bit more spunk and electricity on this. I think Saving Grace is good. Really hated Copycat a lot. I think Jason mentioned that already. I absolutely hated that song, which kind of signals the trail off for the rest of the album. I think it kind of just, none of the songs really after that are, Fee Fi Fo is terrible. Delilah's okay. They should have really just cut it after Saving Grace. What's on My Mind is decent, but so, it's tough when albums just kind of die off like that. Hurts the overall score. So I've just got it at 3, but I do appreciate that they tried more things, like when I was alluding to when talking about Wake Up and Smell the Coffee. They did a little bit more work on this album, so I appreciate it. And I just, with a little bit more of sonic variety and fewer clunkers other than Copycat and Fee-Fi Fo, I think it's a better overall listen than most of the other stuff. So number 3, Bury the Hatchet, 3 stars.
All right, my number 3 is Wake Up and Smell the Coffee. They return to Stephen Street, probably a good move. Starts out kind of slow, Never Grow Old. It's a bit of a sleepy opener, but after that, I think things pick up nicely. I like Analyze. Joe's right, it does sound a lot like their early hits, but I think both in a good way and a bad way. On one hand, I think it's their best track since those hits. So I'd rather that than what they've been doing. But at the same time, it kind of further proves the point that they don't really have any new ideas. I'd be kind of interested in knowing more about Stephen Street's production style, because it seems like when he's around, they write better songs. I don't know if he like pushes them to write more, or if he's actively involved in writing with them and just not taking writing credits. I don't know, but I feel like the hooks are definitely stronger when he's around. That was part of the problem with the Bruce Fairbairn record. You do get a track like Concept. Of course, it's 2001, so you're bound to get one of these tracks that has like this pseudo trip hop programmed beat. Really, not good. I don't like that style, and I don't think they're even doing a good version of it. So could have skipped that. But other than that, I think most of this record is pretty decent, pretty hook filled. Again, nothing new or exciting, but at least melodic. So there's that. I got this one at 3 stars. So I think it's a decent record.
I'm with Cramser again. Bury the Hatchet. Jason likes the album cover. It was voted as one of the worst ever, but whatever. I think this is far more melodic and catchy than Wake Up and Smell the Coffee. Much better writing, other than Copycat and Fee-Fi Fo, which Copycat just kills the whole record. It's really unfortunate that they put that song on here. It's too long, 14 tracks, but I think there's lots of good songs on here. Like Cramser mentioned, the horns on Loud and Clear are cool. You still get the jangly guitar, some bouncy bass. It sounds like a cross between like the Smiths and Blur. Dolores' vocal melody, I think, is really good on that. Nice and complex. Promises, a little, heavier, rockier. It's the last single to chart in the US from them. You and Me's real pretty, Just My Imagination. Kind of maybe copies The Boy with a Thorn in His Side and Our House from Madness. Maybe a little too much. Like I keep getting like these vibes every time I listen to a Cranberries album. I'm like, where have I heard that before? And it's usually like the Smiths or, one of those 80s Brit bands. Speaking of, the next song on my notes, Desperate Andy, just that like super Morrissey vocal style, like the Isn't It Dandy, Have Yourself Another Shandy, Andy. Like it's just too Morrissey. Like she's pulling a little bit too much from Morrissey. I know they love the Smiths, like they said it, but it's a decent song anyway, despite its sort of copycatness. And I think it kind of trails off. Like the first half, 4 stars. But as soon as Copycat comes on, the rest of the album, and there's like 5 more tracks, it kind of just dies for me. So I have it at 3.5 stars, but I think it's pretty good. If they had kept going with that, as good as the first half is, it would be a better record, but they blew it, so it's only 3.5 stars. Misses out on the coveted Joe Steigerwald 4-star rating. Coveted.
All right. My number 2 is their second release, No Need to Argue. I think the production and the sound is basically everybody else is doing it, so why don't we do it again, pretty much. So it's pretty good, though. I'm going 3.5 stars for this, which means very good. I like Ode to My Family quite a bit, but The production's similar, but I think maybe it's a little bit cruder and a little bit more darker and has a little bit more like blue collar vibes. A little bit less just kind of like whimsicalness. I think Dolores sounds really good on here. Probably the best sounding album for Dolores O'Riordan. Again, sometimes I just don't think she challenges herself too much, especially with the melodies and like with the emotion. Like, I mean, she has moments for sure, but a lot of it always just seems so nonchalant at times. It's like too much. She never just expands out of her comfort zone, I feel like. 21 is okay. Obviously, I like Zombie a good bit. There's a lot of dread on this album, which I think is cool. It's a cool emotion. And when it translates into audience reaction, it's great. But the compositions at times are just way too sparse. And that's a big problem I have with their songs that don't really land. It's just like nothing's happening for like seconds at a time. It's just like a little dangly arpeggio and root notes on the bass and just the most simple 4/4 little like snare taps. And it's like, okay, you got anything else here? Like this is kind of putting me to sleep a little bit. But there are some really good songs, especially at the end. I think the second half of this album is really good because it kind of picks up the emotion, and the compositions are much better, with like Ridiculous Thoughts, Dreaming My Dreams, Daffodil Lament, and then the title track to close. I think it ends strong. So I'm going 3.5 stars. No need to argue.
Man, when was the last time we had a trifecta? It's been a long time.
The
Guns N' Roses, I think, maybe.
Ooh, that was like 6 months ago, wasn't it?
It's been a long time. I could be wrong, but I think that might be the last one. But it's not going to happen here either. I've got everybody else is doing it. So why can't we at number 2? Their debut record, it was number 1 in the UK and Ireland it was on the charts for 86 weeks in the UK, number 18 in the US, but it was on the Billboard 200 for 130 weeks and sold 6 million copies in the US alone. So that's pretty impressive for a debut. I hate the snare sound on this record, but aside from that, I think it's a decent little record. Dreams is incredible, anthemic, great melody, lingers great. I Still Do has a very cool kind of dream pop sort of vibe, very kind of like 80s college radio sort of song. That's kind of how I would define this record. It's kind of that sound, but it's a little updated, a little more polished, and kind of ready to capitalize on the fact that that music is now the mainstream. So very much right place, right time. I think they do a much better job on these early first 2 records of coming up with more interesting arrangements for the songs. Sunday has acoustics and strings that make for a nice full sound. The guitars on Pretty are kind of flanged out, creates kind of a cool wide effect. Overall, the songwriting I think on this record is pretty good too. There's some clunkers and some bad lyrics after these first 2 records, but on the first 2 records, I think even though it may not be like the greatest songwriting you've ever heard, I think the lyrics are serviceable and they never jump out at you as bad on these first 2 records the way they start to do on the 3rd record and beyond. So 3 stars for EEIDISWCW ?
Yikes. My number 2 is going to be No Need to Argue. It's pretty much a rehash. Zombie is really the standout as far as being different. Very jangly, got the little dream pop stuff, plenty of nice little guitar arpeggios, plenty of jangliness. Everyone knows Zombie, but Ode to My Family is really nice, kind of sweet, sentimental, really pretty. Icicle Melts, very jangly. I don't know how to pronounce this. Brogue, the sort of Irish accent, the way they speak. She kind of really leans into that a lot on this album. You can really, you know where she's from. Like there's no disguising it, which I like. Like it adds a uniqueness to her voice and to the music. But you want more kind of like that Irishness coming in. Like they never expand their sound into like folk Irish music or like traditional Irish sounds, which I always thought was kind of weird. It's like just straight Brit, like 80s pop. It's just like the Smiths, basically, maybe a little REM. I don't know. It just seems kind of too much like a rehash. I don't think she's pushing herself. The song's a little too like mid-tempo. Like other than Zombie, she never like gets way up there and really belts. So it's good, like some good stuff. I like 21 and Daffodil Lament and No Need to Argue are all good, but it's too long and there's not quite enough, not enough dreams and lingers is basically what I want over and over again. And without those two like centerpieces, I don't know, it's good, it's just not as good as the debut. So it's 3.5 stars again for me.
All right, my winner is Everybody Else Is Doing It. I used to have this at 4 stars. We did albums of the year last year. I went through it again, thought about downgrading it, and now I have. It's down to 3.5 stars. It is not a great album to me. I think it is really good, but not quite great. It's just a little bit too simple. It just leaves me wanting more. It's a little too sparse, which I've been talking about over and over and over. You just need to put more into it. They need more oomph. Songs need to carry more weight. They need more stuff to them. Like everything is like 80% of the way there, and then they're like, "That's fine. Yeah, we'll just wrap that song up. We're good." It's like, no, you can squeeze more juice out of these songs if you just get into it. But I do love the vibe of this album. It's got that cool, just like rainy day, gothic kind of like haunting romanticism drenched with like college rock pop. Very cool. It's a great mood on this, but too many of the songs that don't stick out kind of blend together, especially toward the end. Not Sorry is great. Dreams, I Still Do, Linger, Pretty. But yeah, it just leaves me wanting a little bit more. I wish that, I wish they were just like, it at times doesn't even sound like or seem like they're that interested in being musicians. Does that make sense? Like they're not like in love with their own music or other music, because it doesn't really like come together. Like there's such a lack of enthusiasm at times, I feel like, that it just really hurts everything. I don't know how else to describe it, but I do think that there's not really a terrible song on here like a Copycat or such, but it's close to 4 stars, but just need to squeeze a little bit more juice out of the Cranberry to get it where it needs to be. But I still think it's very good and I enjoy listening to it. And Dreams and Linger are just absolute bangers. So
Right, my number 1 is No Need to Argue. It does lack the highs of the debut, doesn't have that Dreams type track on it. I think overall it's more consistent throughout. It's a pretty solid record. I think it sounds better, fuller, a little richer. I think it's just a better sounding record overall. The sofa on the front cover of this record is the same sofa in the music video for Supergrass Is All Right, which is pretty sweet. I think there's a good amount of variety on this record. I Can't Be With You is probably faster than any track on the debut. Zombie's probably heavier. And I think they managed to do a lot with a little here. Throughout their whole catalog, they don't really do a whole lot in terms of like fancy production or electronics, or the sounds that you hear on Cranberries records are basically guitar, bass, drums, and Dolores. And as you go through the discography, it starts to get really kind of just a little samey, a little bland, a little boring. But I think on this record, it's mixed in such a way you can hear everything really clearly. And there's just little tiny touches in the mix that kind of jump out at you. You've got some cool EBO on some tracks. There's tambourine that sticks out in kind of an interesting way on a few songs. I think the drumming is very good on this record. As far as the 3 guys in the band that aren't Dolores, he is by far the standout. I think there's pretty solid drumming throughout the catalog. Cram noted it on one album, but I think throughout he's a pretty solid drummer. I almost never noticed the other 2 guys. They got to be the 2 luckiest guys in the music industry to end up in a band with Dolores, just riding that wave, because they don't really do anything other than strum guitar chords and play very basic bass lines. It's just pretty rudimentary stuff, but it works on this record. It works on the debut very well. I think it's by far the best songwriting, the best production in their whole career. I like the hits from the other record better, but we're grading records here, so this is the best one for me. 3.5 stars. I don't know if I said that.
Well, what shall we do with everybody else is doing it, so why can't we? I think the biggest problem with the album is the fact that not every song is Dreams and Linger, because you have two songs that are literally 10s out of 10. Like, they will be in the song of the year running for me. I think they're both about as perfect as you can get for 90s alternative rock. And there's some other good songs on here. Sunday, I Still Do are both good. But I don't know, it's tough because Linger was the first song that they ever did, I believe. And like, it's just so perfect. And like, it's all downhill kind of from there. So like, everything about that track, they could have done more of. Like, you have like the heavy Irish accents. You have that cool like background vocal that she's doing. You have like a synth line playing those symphonic parts. You have great drumming, love the drumming. And yet like, they don't do that more often. Like, they kind of jettison the whole synth stuff. They kind of play down the Irish like backing vocals, like that cool, I don't know what it's called. But on a track like Dreams, like she does that yodel at the end. Like, they never do that again. Like, they never lean into that like unique Irish sound. And I always thought it was really weird that they don't. And even the guitar parts, like on Dreams, a really cool guitar part, like some really cool stuff, really memorable guitar arpeggios. Like, they have that like shuddering like phaser or tremolo guitar that comes in. And like, it's completely original sounding and like unique. And yet like, they don't follow that template further and continue with that. Like, they kind of get more generic, which I find just completely odd, because those were the two biggest songs from the album. And they were like, nah, we don't want to do that anymore. We're going to do other stuff. So I don't know. Just seems weird. It seems like a case of like just lost potential, missed potential on this. But that being said, I think it's a pretty darn good album. I'm going to give it 4 stars. If it didn't have Dreams and Linger, no, it would not be a 4-star album. But I think those songs, like the anticipation of just those songs coming on soon, I think is enough. And everything else is pretty good. It's 40 minutes long. It's solid throughout. I think the guitar playing on this is probably the best in their whole catalog. I think it's a good album. 4 stars. Stephen Street does a really nice job of bringing in the Smiths and U2 and Sinead O'Connor. Good album, but as a band, the Cranberries, a little disappointing that they never really followed this up.
Yeah, it's like wasted potential. Like, kind of what I was trying to say, you said pretty well. Like, they had it there. They just like, it's like, do you not love your own music? Are you not that interested in being better? Like, there's just like no effort in my eyes to like get it going. I don't get it.
All right. So, yeah, I don't know. I think I agree. Wasted potential. But I think those songs almost feel like accidents, because I don't feel like anyone in the band was that strong of a songwriter. Like, where did those songs come from? I don't really get it. You're right about like some interesting things with like the phaser guitars and like arrangement wise, them doing more interesting things. But I think they're just better written songs too. And they never wrote songs that good again that could have been arranged in a way that made them that good. But there you go. There's the Cranberries listography. Hope you're happy now, guys. You've been pushing for it and we gave it to you. I imagine most people will be similarly aligned with our lists and our thoughts, but let us know what you think. Are we being too hard on them? Do you feel the way our couple of commenters do, that they are a great overlooked band, especially by us Americans? Just let us know what your overall thoughts are on the Cranberries, how you rate their records. Drop that all down in the comments. Hit the like button if you like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed yet. Hit the bell for notifications. Check the description for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our website. And head on over to the community tab of our YouTube page to vote in a poll that we have up. We have each selected 4 artists. Whichever grouping of 4 wins will be the 4 bands that we cover in January of 2022. So there's a whole month of programming on the line and a lot of cool artists and come back tomorrow for our top 10 favorite Cranberries songs.